It's v.h.s.x. What do you mean?
Alright everybody, welcome back. We got another video suggested by one of you guys. So shout out to Aureus for suggesting this video from Scott Junn titled Why I Don't Want Jason in DBD, or I guess in Dead by Daylight if you want the full title. Link in the description. But I wanted to give my thoughts on this because, you know, it's been a while since I've actually disagreed with Scott lately, because I usually kind of go back and forth with Scott. He tends to kind of flip-flop his opinions pretty heavily between video to video, so that's why when I talk about Scott and his points, I'll make sure to include the clip when I talk about it, because it tends to change. So in this particular example, we might flat out disagree entirely, because apparently he doesn't want a horror icon within the Museum of Horror as they know it to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and give my thoughts on it, and I want to give a listen as to why he believes that Jason shouldn't be in the game.
You know, say Jason, we want Jason. Jason is probably the single most requested killer we've had in this game's history.
Rightfully
if we
so.
account for the entire existence of Dead by Daylight.
Rightfully so.
And I don't want Jason in this game, like, at all.
Why?
And I want to go over why that is. I'm not like a Jason hater or anything. Now, to be fair, I've only ever seen the first Friday the 13th movie, the 1981.
So if he only wait, hold on. I don't want to bag on Scott like too heavily, but I do have to say though that if you've only seen the very first film, right? You've only seen the very first film, right? So 1980, very first film, Jason wasn't even in that movie. It was actually his mom, right? Which, hey, spoiler alert, if you haven't goddamn seen the movie, that movie is like 20 something years old. You should have seen it, all right? You should have seen the movie. You should have paid attention in Scream. If you watch the Scream movies, you should have paid attention because they mention it there. Pay attention. Should have watched the movie. Watch the movie. Yada, yada, yada. But if you haven't seen the source material, I don't want to say you don't have credibility, but like, you don't have a lot of information to know how, like, you know, about the character to be able to just like, to be like, hey, I don't need that character in there, when it's like you didn't even really see what he could do. Like, you didn't see the movies. You didn't go on the journey like the rest of us have to learn to love the character, you know, as much as the rest of us do.
And I thought it was fine. It was just like, okay, it's just a slasher movie. It was like fairly entertaining, but you know, it was just a product of the times, and like films like that were like super loved. But it was whatever. So I'm already not like super crazy about the IP in general. I just thought it was like, okay, but I can respect that it's an iconic slasher figure. I mean, he is literally like, Dead by Daylight survivors in the, you know, in the actual code are called campers, and it's literally based off of Camp Crystal Lake. Like, Jason did legitimately like launch the entire concept of like the slasher. So
So Scott can at least acknowledge that the DBD's mere existence was basically grandfathered in from Jason, from the movies. They literally are called campers in the code. Like, these developers were clearly inspired by those films, right? The whole campfire, the campers by the campfire. Like, these are things that were basically from the ground up. They were inspired by Jason specifically. But at the same time, we don't want him in the game. So that, I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, because we're acknowledging that bro literally grandfathered it in, but he doesn't deserve to be in the game. Like, huh? What are you talking about, bro?
I can respect him a lot for that. So the reason I don't want him in Dead by Daylight is he's just not interesting. He doesn't do anything that would be interesting converted to gameplay, and that's the part where I have to kind of bring up, like, you know, like, Scott, like, you haven't seen the movies. You just said you only saw the first one. He wasn't in the first one. So how, like, he was in the first one at the end. So how would you know what he can do? Like, how would you know what he can do, like, and be converted into the game if you haven't seen what he could do? You know, with all due respect, I'm just saying, like, you haven't seen the source material. So how would you have known? How would you have known that, right? And the reason I say that is because
this character has capabilities of not only, which if you played the Friday the 13th game, you also know what I'm talking about. Jason has been able to not only tank like tons of damage, which we already know that could be an interesting aspect. He could have like some kind of enduring where he can walk through walls and walk through pallets and stuff like that without having to manually break it. That's already one idea. He also had an affinity to use any weapon. He literally is able to use any weapon, and it was showed in the video game as well. He can use pretty much any weapon and do extremely well with it. Bro, in the movie, had launched a harpoon gun from, I believe, it was like across the entire like lake, I believe it was. And I obviously I'm not able to like measure the freaking lake to tell you the distance. But bro has a like, I don't know what kind of power bro got that he was able to accurately get somebody with a harpoon gun from across the entire campsite pretty accurately, might I add. He is able to use any weapon. He doesn't ever die, right? He has incredible strength, right? You already know that. And like I said, you can pretty much make it so that this character can maybe switch weapons in the game. Like in DBD, make it sort of like Vecna where he can switch weapons for they to do different things. So say he has a ranged option, or say he has like a bear trap option, or say he has a because depending if you go for the remake, like if you're inspired by the remake, you use bear traps there and made traps. So like there's different things that you could do, right? So that's just where I'm coming from. Now, secondly, we have to keep in mind that this is still DBD, right? So DBD in general is a game that just has a lot of these characters that are pretty one note, pretty simplistic. So let's look at Springtrap, one of the most beloved licenses, right, that were going to be added into the game, and we finally got it, and it was man with axe, man with door, and camera. So if that can be added, then I'm pretty sure Jason can get added. Keeping in mind that Myers was a man that literally, before the rework, was a man that would stare at you and then lift his arm up and one-shot you. Very simplistic when he came in on, besides the whole extra Mori stuff and whatever. We're just taking the very bare bones of these characters, right? To be fair, another character, artist, you're launching birds at people, pretty simplistic. You're not really doing anything fancy. You can if you dedicate the time to it, but on the surface and the very base level to explain it to somebody, you're just like, hey, you shoot birds. That's it. Let's say Wraith, right? Because I know Scott plays a lot of Wraith. Bro swings his bell, he turns invisible. He uncloaks, that's it, basically. He gets a little faster, yeah, but that's about it. I mean, he's still a man with a bell. He slaps the bell. He goes a little bit fast. He uncloaks, he's not as fast, he can hit you. Like, pretty simple. I mean, it's not like you don't need to be a master to be able to understand Wraith. Like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to load up Wraith. You know what I mean? It's pretty simplistic, right? A lot of these characters are pretty simplistic. So I have to say, like, in that sense, I disagree, because a lot of these characters just do not have anything crazy about them. Like, there's no like crazy high level gameplay to like necessarily, you need to implement a character. Those things are of course discovered by the players that do main those characters. They can discover those uniqueness and discover those different aspects and ways to use the character. But at the surface, the conception of the characters are usually very simple. At the end of the day, Jason has different aspects that he could use. You could even take elements from the Friday the 13th game. You can make him teleport, or you can make him walk faster. You can make him have different weapons that he can pick up from the map and use them in different ways, like a harpoon gun, or he can have like an axe or something that he could break pallets and walls faster, or he can have a rage mode and then he can walk through walls and instead of having to break it manually, which can allow him to go through stuff a little bit more, like a little bit quicker. You know what I mean? You can have an aspect where it has to do with Jason's like mom's her head and sweater or something like that. You can use that to stun him potentially. stuff like that. Like, you can take aspects from those movies if you decide to do so. Now, obviously, they're not going to do that because they're going off Jason Universe, and they're not going to be going off the original Jason license, because obviously that is a whole can of worms. But still, you can, because this is a new version of Jason, you can get creative and come up with new things that are still faithful to the character, but still can fit into the game. Because, to be fair, there's not a lot you can bring into the game at this point. The game is very limited in with what it can implement. That's just where I'm coming from. So that's just mainly where I'm coming from. I'm gonna give it one
main thing I focus on when discussing, what do you want to be added to Dead by Daylight? And whenever people ask me, like, what license do I want to see? I don't really care about the license as long as the gameplay is fun. And I don't think you could make Jason interesting in any way. I think he would work in like 2016 Dead by Daylight, where it's really very simple and it's just, man with machete is actually a viable thing that could potentially work. The problem is Trapper is basically, he's a stand-in for Jason already. They have gone on record saying that Trapper is basically just Temu Jason with bear traps. So he kind of already exists in that form. And again, I did a bunch of research on what Jason actually does in the movies. Again, he doesn't really do anything. He doesn't have like any powers. He's just undead, unstoppable. So his power is having enduring and brutal strength or something. Like, what would he physically do in the game? You can't just be a killer that runs around and just M1s people with a machete, because that would be fucking terrible. He would be dog shit and no one would ever play him. And obviously if you add Jason in the game and make him weak, people are going to be very upset. So what do you have to do? You have to start kind of stretching thematically what would work. And now Friday the 13th, the game kind of did that a little bit, because in that
that's briefly what I was saying, right? Because if you've seen the movies, you know what he was capable of doing. Obviously, if you're just like Googling things, it's not going to be as thematic and it's not going to look as flashy. But that's what I was saying. Like, one of the core aspects of Jason is that he can use basically any weapon. You can, he's famously known for having, let's say, just a machete, right? But let's also look at stuff like Mortal Kombat X, right? Let's look at Multiverses when he was added to that game. Let's look at, well, I can't really say Fortnite because they didn't add anything for that. But when you look at the cosmetics for Fortnite, he had an axe and a machete, stuff like that. So you can add in, say, lightning elements because he was struck by lightning. So you can add in like a lightning element of some kind, right? You can have a grabbing ability of some kind where like he can try to choke you out or something like that. Like, there's different aspects you could do, because you already have a choking animation when it came down to Myers, right? So that's already a possibility in the game. I don't know. I'm standing by where I stand by. You let me know your thoughts, of course, but I think he belongs in the game. I think just for the sheer fact he's a horror icon, the sheer fact that there's a lot of things you can pull from, there's a lot of things you can really get imaginative with. If you understand the source material and you've seen different versions of this character, you understand that there is a lot of elements that can be utilized. Because keep in mind that Scott's not saying that Myers doesn't belong in DBD as well, but he's also quite similar in that sense, right? He's an unstoppable force, and he was fine with that, right? But somehow Jason is a problem. You know what I mean? So I want to know what you guys think, of course. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's go ahead and read off these wonderful members. We got Patreon, Crow Vader. All my YouTube members, Brando, Evil Blade, Cap Courteous, WTF You're Not J-Lo, Evil Peach, Cargan Falcon, Dole Whip, Noxus, Zero Mocker, Jack, Christian, and Crow Vader. Really appreciate you guys supporting, man. And if you also subbed on Twitch, just know that you got love coming your way too. Appreciate you guys, man.